For this build, you're going to need 4 sheets of foam board, a Flite Test C power pack, 2 9-gram servos, 3 5-gram servos, 3 4-inch servo extensions, 1 servo Y harness, 9 of the mini servo horns from Flite Test, 1 Firewall for the C-Pack motor, about a dozen barbecue skewers, a 11 by 4.5 or 4.7 prop, your servo wire, and some Velcro. Now, as options for if you're adding the landing gear and if you want to use paint sticks instead of foam for the wing spars, you'll need 3 to 4 paint sticks, 4 popsicle sticks, and 4 of 1 3/4 inch wheels. So now, as a note before we start building, on the plans, there's a number of them where there's some of the reference lines are labeled that you have to put them on the opposite side of the foam as the cut lines. So as you're tracing your plans onto the foam board, be sure to pay close attention to those lines. Alright, now that you got everything together, let's start on the build. Alright, the first thing we're going to build in our build is the power pod. So get your power pod, trace it, and cut it out. And then what we're going to do is remove the foam from these areas. So once you got the foam removed, you'll notice that there was some lines marked here next to where the barbecue skewer that holds the power pod in is going to go. So what we want to do is we want to punch the holes where the barbecue skewer is going to go. And then because we're only using one barbecue skewer to hold this power pod in, we want to reinforce it a little. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a barbecue skewer and we're going to cut some sections here that are about as long as that thing, and then what we're going to do is glue them in to help reinforce our power pod. Once we got 4 of these pieces cut out, what we're going to do is just put a little hot glue down. We're going to place 2 of these on the backside inside of the power pod. We're going to put 2 of them there, and I'm going to stick 2 of them here. Now that we got the barbecue skewers glued in there, we're going to start assembly. What we're going to do is we're going to start on the side that doesn't have the tab at the end and work our way across. So this tab part here is the last part we glued down. So now these 2 panels here have the A folds on them, which means we're going to be folding it so that the sections that have the barbecue skewers are above those 2 pieces. Okay, once the glue is dry, we're going to take our Firewall and get that mounted. Okay, once that's dry, you want to take some of your packing tape, tear a piece of that off. You want to just stick that over here to reinforce it and help hold it to the power pod. Now once that's done, what we want to do is we want to cut out a couple of these holes here so we can let the wires and the screws and the shaft from the motor pass through. So now we got our power pod assembled, we're going to mount the motor to the power pod. Once you've got your motor anchored to the power pod, hook up the ESC. Now the next step is going to be to test to make sure that the motor is rotating in the appropriate direction. We're going to give it just a little bit of throttle. Now if I put my finger on it, the motor wants to spin my finger in a counterclockwise direction, which means I have the rotation backwards. And to fix that, we're going to disconnect the motor, the battery, and then what we're going to do is we're going to unplug 2 of the wires and just switch what plugs they go to. Now that we've done that, we're testing and it looks like the motor's spinning in the clockwise direction, which is what we're looking for. So now that our power pod's set, we're going to move on to the core of the fuselage. So these are the parts that we're going to need for assembling the core of the fuselage. We're going to start with this part right here, so set the others aside and we'll get back to them in a minute. So this is the main core part of the fuselage. Now this is one of the pieces I mentioned earlier where there's going to be some lines that you have on the back here that you want to mark down. These are going to be where our circle formers are going to end up eventually. So go ahead and make sure you have those marked before you start tearing into this. And let's start by removing all of the foam. So now while you're removing the foam, you may break this piece off here. You don't really need to worry about that piece. It's not really doing anything structurally, and this part's going to be hidden inside anyways, so it's not going to add any visual difference. So if you want to just pull that off completely, that shouldn't be an issue. So once you got this part cleaned up, you'll notice that these two pieces are the pieces that have our A folds on them. So what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around, once again starting with the side without the tab, moving to the side with the tab, until we get this folded up into our box. The main box set up, we've got the top and the bottom. Now the reason you know the difference is because of the shape of the middle wing that's going to be going through here. So let's start with the top. So on the top, you're going to want these two pieces here. What these are is these are pieces that are going to sit in here up top. And what you want to do is you just want to pinch these a little bit where the tabs go in. And they're going to sit in here like this. And what these are is these are guides that the top wing are going to sit on. So go ahead and get those glued in. So to get those glued in, all I do is put a little bit of glue there, there, and there, and then just a dab of glue on the recessed areas on the top and bottom there. Once you've got those in place, what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over. We're going to grab these pieces here to put on the bottom. Now the key with these is we got these two tabs here, like that. Those are going to sit with the high pointed thing towards the front. There. Then we got these two slope pieces like that. And what we want is this, we want the high point towards the back. So go ahead, get those glued in. Alright, now that we got those pieces glued in, we're going to set that aside for a minute. And I'm going to bring out this, which is the front part of our center fuselage core. So with this, once again, we've got the 4 stripes here. What we want to do is we want to remove the foam from that. Now this piece, like the other ones, we're going to form into a box. And what we're going to do is we're going to start again, the part without the tab, working our way to the place to the tab, keeping in mind these are where our A folds are. So now once you got that formed up, there's the 2 marks on the side here that we have that were noted to be on the opposite side again. Now this is similar to the power pod. What we're going to do is we're going to place some barbecue skewers glued on the side here to help reinforce where the barbecue skewer that holds the power pod in is going to be. So now once you got your reinforcements in, what we're going to do is we're going to grab all of the circular formers and we're going to start assembling the fuselage. Alright, so we have our formers here. So the first 2 we're going to start out with is not actually 1 and 1A, which go at the front. So we're going to start with 2 here. This is going to go on, this center core part right here and just sit at the very back of it. Now keep in mind, this openings here is the top, and you want the part that's kind of with the trapezoid there at the top, right? So you just put that on there, put a little bit of glue on both sides there and there. Now you want to set this flat on the table so you make sure that this is really at the end of this piece here. So once you got that glued in, set that aside and grab your other former here. So now what you're going to want is you're going to want part number 3. That looks like that. Now keep in mind, these larger parts here are the bottom, the smaller ones are at the top. So what you want to do is, once again, keeping the trapezoidal part at the top, slide this on here, and you should have on your fuselage the lines marking where this guy's going to go. So just go ahead and stick that on in place. If you happen to break this little part at the bottom, that's not a big deal. So what you do is slide it back a little bit and just put a bead of glue on both the sides where those marks are, and just slide this guy into place. Now since we already broke this bottom part, you don't really need that there, and you may just break it off getting the battery in and out earlier, so I'm just going to cut that off. So now that we have this part on here and this part here, these guys are going to fit together. You can take your knife and just kind of bevel the edges a little bit. Or what you can do is you can just take your finger and kind of pinch it down to help get them together. So let's test fit this guy here. And you're going to want to fold it up so these guys are right next to each other, kind of like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the front off. I'm going to put glue around here, and I'm going to put a bead of glue about 1/8 to 1/4 inch in from the edge of this guy. And then just kind of smear a little around there, do a little at the top there. And we're just going to fit these guys together like that. And make sure you pinch these guys together real good so they stay together. The next two formers we're going to grab are going to be formers 1 and 1A. They both look like this. Now 1, if you'll notice, is a little smaller than the other for the center square, but the outsides are the same diameter. So we got these two pieces. We're going to set the one, which is 1 with the smaller square, down for a minute. We're going to take the one with the larger square. Now this one's going to slide on the front. Now what we want is we want the hole to be on the opposite side of these two. So we want the hole to be on the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to test fit this guy in here. What we can do is we can use the table, kind of push it down and make sure it's in place. Then what we're going to do is on the two sides and the bottom, we're just going to run a little bead of glue, take some scrap foam to get that smushed in there. So now once that's dry, we're going to take our other piece, our number 1 piece here, and that's going to glue on just like this. Now what we want is we want it to make sure so that the square edges line up with the edges of this guy here. I'm going to take and put a bead of glue around the edge here, a bead of glue around the square, and then just kind of fill in a little bit. Now an easy way to get this to kind of align is to start by using the hole. And then we're just going to line that guy up there. Squeeze the edges together. Then give this a minute to dry. Next former we're going to do is former number 4. So former number 4 actually comes in 3 pieces. We've got the large one and the 2 small ones, right? So if we set it so we've got the top up here, this part here is going to sit right there, with the bottom of it basically coming to where the top of this wing cut opening is, right there. I'm going to put a bead of glue down each side here and here where the guides are, and I'm just going to stick this guy on using our fingers to guide elevation wise where it's going to be. We're just going to hold it until it's dry. Once we got that dried, the next thing we're going to have are these two small pieces here. Now those are going to sit, we've got a little flat part on it right there. We want that to be basically facing the bottom of the plane. So with our fuselage upside down, we're going to slide this in between the two formers or the wing braces that we already have there. It's going to kind of sit like that, making sure it lines up even with the inside there. We're just going to put a little bit of glue on the both sides there and stick both of these guys in. So the next guy we're going to put on is number 5, which is marked right about here just behind the wing. So we've got our number 5 piece here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to slide that on to the very back of it, line it up with those edge marks. Okay. Once we've got it test fit on there, let's just pull it off, and we're going to put a bead of glue on the 3 sides. Now stick it in just behind where those marks are, and then just kind of slide it forward, making sure to line it up in between the two line marks that you have, and then just use your scrap foam to smear some of the excess glue. The next ones we're going to do is 6 and 7. 6 and 7 are the two squares like this. The center hole on these two are the same, but 7 is slightly smaller in diameter than 6. We're going to start by gluing these two guys together. So take 7, which is the smaller one, put a bead of glue all around it, and glue it together. Now you want to make sure you get the tops aligned and the bottoms aligned. On the plans there's kind of a center line marking the center there, down at the bottom. Make sure you have those guys touching each other, but you want to glue it such that you can still see where that center line is once they're glued together. So get those lined up, line up the square centers there, and give these a second to dry. Okay, now once they're dry, we're going to slide them on. So what you want to do is you want to slide it on the end here. Once again, if you need to pinch the end of the center core here a little bit, go ahead and do so. And slide them in, making sure to keep the center line marked down at the bottom, and make sure that you have 6 forward and 7 behind. So the larger one towards the front of the plane. So get those slid on so they're close to these marks here. Once you're ready, go ahead and put glue down where those guys are so you can slide them on over and get them locked in place. So the last formers we're going to put on are these 4 little guys labeled as 8. Now there's 2 that are slightly larger, and then there's 2 that are slightly smaller. The slightly larger ones are going to go on the top and the bottom, and the smaller ones are going to go on the sides. So what we can do is you can just simply put a little bead of glue at the end there, and stick on the appropriate piece. Once again, the smaller ones being on the sides, the bigger ones being on the top and bottom. Once you got those installed, the core of our fuselage is done. Now once you have the core with all the formers on it done, the last thing we're going to install is these guides right here. Now there should be 2 sets of 2. They're all the same size, so it doesn't really matter where you put them. But what we're going to do is we're going to stick these guys up in the front here. We're going to line them kind of with the edge of the fuselage spar. We're going to put one in each of these locations, lining them up so they're flush there. So when you've got the top two pieces in here, you wanted those aligned with the outer edge here. Now the bottom pieces you're actually going to want to install flush with the gap in these guys, this opening right here. So now after you got those glued in, put a good extra reinforcing bead behind here, because these guys are going to be helping us hold the battery in, which in this particular model, you don't strap the battery in, it actually stays in via friction. So make sure you back those up and make sure you don't have any beads of glue on the inside sticking in there. So once you've got the core of the fuselage assembled and these formers in, next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to grab the battery that you're going to be running the plane off of. Now I recommend using a 3S2200 on this because you're going to need the weight up front in order to get the center of gravity in the plane to balance. So now take your battery and set it in the front area here, which is approximately where it's going to be. Now there isn't a way to strap the battery down on this because we can't get to the compartment here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some excess Velcro that you may have and put it up front on the sidewalls here to help the battery kind of friction stay in. Now, if you, depending on what type of the Velcro, side of the Velcro you have on your battery, you want to make sure you're using the same kind. So if you have the fuzzy part on there, you're going to want to put the fuzzy part in here. If you have the hook side, you're going to want to put the hook sides in here. So go ahead and cut a couple of strips, and you're going to want strips that basically run the entire length of this thing to make sure it stays in. So once you've got that installed, go ahead and put the battery in there and make sure that it's kind of got a little bit of a snug, tight fit to it. Now once you're done with that, you'll notice that some of these guys may be sticking a little bit up, which is fine. So what you want to do is just take your knife and kind of bevel these pieces of foam to match with how high it's sticking up. Once you're done with that, we have the core of our fuselage assembled. And now it's time to skin the fuselage. For skinning the fuselage, you're going to need the following parts here. Now keeping in mind that the main part of the fuselage here is one of the ones that you have where you have the cut mark on the one side and it tells you to put all of the guide marks on the other side. The reason is we don't want to cut all of these holes in here, otherwise it's going to make installing it on the fuselage and also getting it to curve correctly hard. So what we're going to do is we've got these areas here that are cutouts for the wings and the cockpit that we're going to cut out once we get it on the center core. These other lines here are where we're going to add our little features, which are going to be barbecue skewers, to add some nice detail to this plane. So go ahead and get these parts out and then we'll get started. Alright, we're going to start with our main section of the fuselage here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to peel off this part of foam here, removing it, as this is going to be the tab that's going to lock everything together when all is said and done. Now the next step we're going to do is on the same side where that foam came off, not the side where you marked all the components. You're going to want to take and peel the paper off the entire back of this. Once you've got that done, take this to the edge of the table and we're going to pull it over and we're going to curl this piece of foam around so that it makes a circle. Now what you can do at the bottom of this is on the one edge without the tab, just put an ever so small bevel on it. And that'll help it fit together very nicely. Once you've got that done, just put it together, make sure it fits good. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to glue this into the circle before we stick it onto the fuselage. So go ahead, decide where you have your tab, put a bead of glue down there, and also put a little bit of glue down the actual tab itself. Now what you're going to want to do is you want to keep that side on the table there, and you're going to want to fold this over, setting the foam so it's on the top like that, and then just kind of sliding it around, kind of squeezing everything together, making sure that the ends align, and then just put your one hand inside and kind of just rub it on the table until the glue's nice and dry. Now that we have our fuselage section done, grab the center core of it. What we're going to do is making sure that you've got the bottom here with the narrow part in the back. It's kind of this big coffin looking thing. The narrow one in the front, the big one on the side, and all of these straight pieces that are for the barbecue skewers. You're going to want those facing the forward of the plane. And you're going to want this area here is the cockpit. So that's going to be the top side. The seam's going to be at the bottom. So what you want to do is just kind of gently work this onto your formers. So now once you got this on, it should be all the way up, covering former number 4, and former number 7 should be exposed on the back side here. Okay. You also want to make sure that it's going to be centered. So the way you can make it sure it's centered is you've got your guide line on the back of the former here, and you want to make sure that the seam is lined up with that. You may have to twist it a little bit to get everything centered and lined up. Once you've got things pretty well lined up, just back it off a little bit, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put a bead of glue around the front here to start. I'm going to slide it forward. Now don't worry about gluing the back right now, because when we install the cone for the tail of the plane, we'll get that glued on. So once that's on, we're going to set that aside. Grab the tail of our plane. So what we're going to do is we're going to peel off our foam here to give us our tab. And then we're going to peel off the paper. So now that we've got the paper off, what we're going to do is we're going to take our knife and we want to bevel the end of this, starting about 3/8 of an inch back. Just kind of give it a bevel until it's down to the very edge there. This is because we're rolling this over, and if we don't do that, it's going to be a hard time getting it to a nice point in the back. Next, what we're going to do is we're just going to take this edge here and we're going to put a slight bevel in it so that when these pieces we'll be able to get a nice round cone on the end of the plane here. So once that's beveled off, what we're going to do is we're going to take this to the edge of the table to curve it. Now when you take the edge of the table, you're going to want to line up the edge, keeping one edge of the table at the point here, and basically curling it around, keeping this point at the edge of the table so you get a nice cone shape to when you're curving it. Alright, now that we've got that curve, we're going to kind of test fit this in here, keeping it squeezed like that. And that looks pretty good. So what we'll do here is we'll take and we'll put a bead of glue on the edge of the foam there. We'll also making sure to get some on the tab so the tab stays stuck down. Now let's keep the one side on. Kind of roll it in place here, using the table as our friend. Keeping that flat on the table there and squeezing it until it dries. Once that's glued on, get your fuselage back out. What we're going to want to do is we're just going to stick this on here, and it should fit on the tail pretty good. So what you'll do is you've got your seams here, And these should line up. So if you put it on, you're going to want that to line up perfectly with the seam from your main fuselage like that. Test fit it on. Take a look at it. Make sure that these points here are kind of lining up with the center of your fuselage there. If it looks like they're a little off, just kind of go ahead and rotate it a little bit so that center of this, center between these two lines comes down and you've got your parts there. So if that looks good, take the cone off. And what you want to do is you just want to level this out a little bit, because the part of the foam that's on the inside is going to stick out a little bit more since it's a cone. So what you want to do is you just want to put a little bit of a bevel on this so it fits up a little bit tighter. So now once we know how this is going to fit on, we kind of got it lined up, just pulled off a little bit. What we're going to do is we're just going to put a bead of glue around here. And this will be to help hold on the other fuselage, and then just put a bead of glue around this inner former here as well, former number 7. And then put a bead of glue around the end former here, former 8. Now take and stick your cone on, once again making sure everything lines up and you're pushing them kind of tight together. Now once that's done, what you want to do is just take and put a bead of glue on top of the seam here. Take your scrap piece of foam and just kind of smear it in, kind of fill in the gaps there to make sure everything kind of sticks together. So once you've got the back of the fuselage on, we're going to turn to the cowling. Now this is the part where you've got a bunch of dots here, and these are going to be for decorative pieces we're going to be sticking in a little bit. So what you want to do is peel off the foam so you get the little tab on the one side. And now the side opposite of where the tab is, we're going to peel the paper off this entire piece. So now take this to the edge of the table. We're going to curl this up. So once we got this curled, we're just going to put a ever so small bevel in the edge of this piece here. And once again, we're going to assemble this into the circle before we stick it on the fuselage. Put a bead of glue against the foam, then also put a bead of glue on the tab. Let's get that rolled together. So now that we got our front cowling put together, we're going to work on sticking this onto the fuselage. Now one thing you want to make sure you do before you do this is you've got these holes here on the side that are where this barbecue skewer is going to hold the power pot in. You want to make sure you've got the barbecue skewer poked all the way through those holes, because we're going to use those holes to help align the cowling onto the fuselage. All right? The other thing to note is make sure that you've beveled these down, because if you have bulges in these or these are sticking up, it's going to be hard to get the cowling onto the fuselage. So start by setting the cowling down, and then just take your fuselage, making sure to get the bottom lined up with the bottom, and go ahead and just kind of work it in. Now you want to get this in such that the back of former number 2 is lined up with the back of the cowling. Now, as I said, we're going to use that hole to kind of align it. So make sure you've got this rotated such so that the seams are about lined up. So once we've got those lined up, we want to go to the center hole here. What we're going to do is we're going to stick our barbecue skewer through. We're going to kind of search around until we find that hole. All right? So what you may need to do is you may need to twist it around, but then you're going to want to stick the barbecue skewer through until it gets the other hole on the inside. So this may require you to spin it around and rotate it some. You may also have to move it in and out a little bit to get them to line up. Okay. Now once you're through those two holes, you should get the skewer to come out all to the other side. Once you've got that done, what we're going to do is we're going to put a bead of glue around the back side here. And then just take our scrap foam to push that in. Now that we've got that glued in, what you want to do is you want to line it up so that the barbecue skewer is sticking out about 1/8 of an inch on this side. Go over and pinch the other side to about the same 1/8 of an inch. Go ahead and pull that out. And what you're going to want to do is just mark that, cut it with your blade, and break it off. Now what I like to do is just take and put ever so little bit of a bevel on one side. That'll just make getting it in and out easier. What you can do is go ahead and stick that guy back in. Now we're going to add some decoration to this. Our little pegs in the cowling here, along with these guys in. So go ahead and grab a number of barbecue skewers and we'll get started on that. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the little rivets in the cowling here. So what we're going to need is we're going to just need 8 little pieces of barbecue skewer that are about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch long. So go ahead and just get a number of those cut out of your barbecue skewers. Alright, with your little pieces started, what we're going to do is just take and put a little dab of glue into one of the holes, and take the barbecue skewer and just stick it into the hole so that you leave about the same amount that's sticking out from the center one. Right? Just go ahead and do that for all of the holes. Alright, once you got those guys in, we're going to start putting our decorations on here. Now, these are optional, so if you don't want to put them on, that's fine. But we're going to go ahead and show you how. So what you do is take a barbecue skewer, and you're just going to want to cut a section of skewer that matches the length of the guideline that you have on each one. So go ahead and cut a piece for each of these lines. There should be 12 pieces total. So once you got all your pieces cut out, what we're going to do is we're going to take the fuselage, and where the line is, we're just going to put an incredibly small bead of glue. You don't need a whole lot on there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our barbecue skewer, just stick it on there. And if you want to smear some of the glue in, just take one of the pointed pieces of the barbecue skewer to kind of smear that in there. So go ahead and glue all of your accent pieces. Alright, now that we got all of our accent pieces on, we're going to move to working on the tail. So before we start assembling the tail, we're going to want to get our 5-gram servos out. We're going to want to get these assembled and centered and ready to install in the plane. So now when you're getting the servo horns on your servos, you want to use the single arm servo horn. Now putting the wire away from you, the one for the rudder you want to have coming off to the right as you're looking from behind it. Now for the elevators, you're going to want to put these so that you have the arm, one going off in one direction and one going off in the opposite direction. So now go ahead, get the screws in these, and then we'll work on getting tail assembled. Let's set our servos aside for a minute, and we're going to get to assembling the main parts of the tail. So the tail, you're going to have the vertical stabilizer and your horizontal stabilizer. So now on both the rudder and the elevators, you want to put the bevel on the part that moves. So now that we've got the bevels on, we got to focus on getting these guys attached together and into the vertical stabilizer. Now they're going to go into this slot here. So how we're going to do this is there's the two guidelines that we had here. What we want to do is take a barbecue skewer, centering it on the foam in the end of it, and we want to basically thread it down the center of the thing. Now the best way to do this is to just kind of, as you're pushing, spinning, you know, and using the lines as a guide to try and get it straight. Now as you're spinning this, you can kind of feel where it's going to be and keep your fingers pinched on it to where it is, and that'll keep it from kind of popping out where you don't want to in the side of the foam. Once you feel it down to about the end of the line there, go ahead and pull it out and do it on the other one. Now you're going to want to do this to both lines on both vertical or both horizontal stabilizers. Once you've got those holes drilled, go ahead and line these guys up together. What you're going to want to do is take a barbecue skewer and go in a little bit from the end of each of the lines you marked in case you didn't just quite drill it right. And mark it there and go ahead and cut off the barbecue skewer. Once you've got your two barbecue skewers, go ahead and just bevel the edge a little bit so it slides in to the holes fairly easily. Just go ahead and do that on both sides. So after you got them beveled, go ahead and test fit it in one of the sides. And go ahead and stick the other side on as well. Make sure that they slide together and they're nice and tight. So now once you've done that, go ahead and pull them out and just put a dab of glue in the hole on one side. Then go ahead and stick the barbecue skewers all the way in. Now what we're going to do is once you got that done, we're going to stick this inside the little slot here. So what you're going to do is push it in so that the edge of the elevator is right at the edge of this, kind of looking at this side and keeping the foam sort of centered in the vertical stabilizer. So once you've got that, what we're going to do is just put a bead of glue on the center here, put a dab of glue in each of the holes for your other horizontal stabilizer, then go ahead and just slide these guys together, making sure that they're centered on the vertical stabilizer. Now that we've got the tail assembly together, go back to the fuselage here. Now we've got the two inserts where the tail is going to go in and also the rudder servo. Now what we need to do is, since this is curved, the insides are narrower than the outsides. So what we need to do is we need to take our knife and kind of just trim those out, kind of beveling the inside of the holes so that everything will be able to slide in. Go ahead and do it for the elevator servos as well. Alright, now that we got those opened up, what we need to do is we need to get the servo that we're going to be using for the rudder. So what we're going to want to do with this is we need to remove the little tabs on the side here for this. So just go ahead and take a pliers and grab on. Just rock them back and forth until they come off. Once you got those off, take one of the servo extensions and go ahead and plug that in. Just put a dab of hot glue there so that those guys don't come apart. So once you got that in there, this is the hole that we're going to put that in. And you want to feed this down so that the wire goes into the center hole of the fuselage and works its way down there a ways. Now, as I said, the wire is going to be forward, and we're going to stick this guy in, and we want it to stay vertical, and we want right at the top of the main square there to be level with the surface of the cone here, right? So what we'll do is we'll test fit it in there, and once that works, we'll pull it out, we'll add a little glue, and we'll get it stuck in. Now be careful when you're doing this not to lose the servo into the cone, because that might be a little tough to get out. And as you're gluing this, pinch it a little bit on the side so that that glue really adheres between the two. Now after that glue is dry, just put a little extra bead of glue on each side here. Smear that in with your scrap piece of foam, just to make sure this guy stays in there good. So now once that servo's in, we're going to grab our tail assembly again. Go ahead and pinch these two pegs here. And we're going to test fit in these guys here. Alright, that seems to fit. So now we're going to pull it out. I'm just going to put a bead of glue on these surfaces here. We'll get this guy stuck in. And we're going to have to make sure we keep an eye on it to try and keep it aligned with this whole center of the fuselage. All right? Now once you've got that there, go ahead and put a bead of glue down the sides here. And then go ahead and smear that in to make sure we get a really good attachment between these guys. So once you got that on, go ahead and grab your elevator servos. Now what we're going to do is we want to put the servo extensions on these guys as well. Making sure to put a little bead of glue there. These guys don't come apart. Now one thing you're going to want to make sure you don't do is you don't want to Y-harness these guys together. We're going to have to do some programming in this because these servos are going to have to move in opposite directions, or actually in same directions, in order for the elevator to work. And I'll show you how to program those in at the end of the video. So now you've got your servos set up. And what you want to do is, with the wire facing the front of the plane, you're going to want to put them in so that the servo horn is sticking up. So go ahead and just test fit both of the servos in there, feeding the wire like you did on the rudder down the center core of the fuselage. So now once you have the servos test fit in, to finalize them, just simply lift them up a little bit, put a dab of glue under each of the tabs. Just go ahead and stick them down. Go ahead and wipe away the excess glue, kind of wiping it over the tab to help secure it in a little better. Now what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on cutting out some of these holes that we have marked in our fuselage. So what you want to do is start with the middle hole. And basically you want to take your knife and you want to cut out all of these openings, keeping the knife horizontal to the plane as if you had it sitting on its side like this. So go ahead and do that. One thing to note is if you're building the biplane version, don't cut out the middle wing hole. Just do the top and the bottom and the cockpit opening. So once you've got all the pieces cut out, it's going to be a little rough, and you can clean it up. So for example, on these, you can come, cut straight down, clean those off. Now the other thing you're going to want to do is with the ones where the wings goes through, you may have to trim those a little bit by using the guides for the wing placements here. So like for example on the bottom, what you want to do is you want to bring that, you can just kind of run your blade along the guide that you glued into the center core earlier to clean that up just a little bit. So once you got all that cleaned up, go ahead and grab the wires that are inside the fuselage from the tail, and you're going to want to pull those out the hole in the bottom of the fuselage right there. At this point we got our fuselage assembled as far as we can take it. We still have a few parts here that are left over that I showed you earlier. We're going to wait until the wings are installed before we get these put in place. So go ahead and set your fuselage aside along with these parts that you got here, and we're going to work on getting the wings assembled. For assembling the wings, you're going to need the following pieces. Now in the plans, it shows cutouts for foam spars. As an option, you can use paint sticks as spars for the wings. Now the idea of using the paint sticks is that this plane is hard to land, and you're prone to cartwheeling it. So by putting the paint sticks in there is going to add quite a bit of strength for the wings with adding minimal weight. We're going to start with our bottom wing, which is the wing that has the cutout here and the kind of door tab over here, right? So the first thing we're going to do is fold the wing over, and we're going to put our bevels on both sides of the fold. So when we do the fold over, it'll be a lot easier. Now that we got our bevels cut, we're just going to do some test foldovers here. Alright. Now one other thing to note is with the wings, this again has some of the marks that to say trace on the other side. So make sure you've got those on all the wings here before you start folding and assembling them. Now if you're doing the foam spar, what you'll be able to do is just kind of set it using the guides here and glue it on. But I'm going to use the paint sticks. Now make sure this tab that you have here, make sure you don't do anything with that, because that's going to be the door for the battery hatch, and we want to keep it like this enclosed, so make sure you don't bevel that. So now for the paint sticks. Because they come in different sizes, depending on how you get them, you may need to either trim them in this direction or cut multiple ones in the long direction. So the ones that I have weren't long enough to be the complete spar. So what I did is I put a long one in the center and short ones on the outside. You don't want to put them like have one here and then a single one here, because that's just not going to be strong in your wing in the center here. Alright, so if you've got a 3-piece one like this or a single one, go ahead and apply some glue to the bottom of it and then stick the first piece right on the end in the guides there. Hold that and let it dry. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the long one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put a bead of glue right on the end there. I'm going to butt this up tight and hold that down. Let that dry. Now we're going to take our last piece. Once again, apply glue. Apply some to the end there. Butt this up. And hold it down and let it dry. Okay, so now that we got this, what we're going to do is we're going to take our barbecue skewers. We're just going to kind of run them down the little indents you got there to help us when folding the wings over. Now just kind of test fold it over, test fit it. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that as you're folding it over, you're getting this side inside of this guy here, or outside of that guy there, instead of gluing it on the top. So now what we can do is take and put a little bit of glue either here or on top of the paint stick making sure you don't get the glue too far out there or too far this way. Just fold it over and hold firmly for it to dry. Now once those are dry, go ahead and flip the wing over. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put a bead of glue right there and right there to hold the back of the wing down. Go ahead, take a scrap piece of foam, smush that glue in. So now once that's done, we're going to work on this half. Now, go ahead and fold it back and remove this piece of foam in here. Now one thing you're going to notice is this is a little narrower than when you're typically doing like a A or B fold or something like that. The reason is because when we fold this up, we want it to actually kind of be angled backwards. And what that's going to do is that's going to help keep this battery hatch closed once we get it on the plane. So go ahead and pull this up. You want to pull it up so it's at about a 80-degree angle. Do a test pull on that. Put it down. Just going to put some glue in there. I'm going to just bring it up. And as I said, you want to bring it up so that it's at about an 80-degree angle. Alright, so now once that's done, go ahead and pop this open. Make sure it didn't stay glued shut. One thing we're going to do is we're going to have our little hinge here. What we're going to do is we're just going to put a little dab of glue on there and just go ahead and take your nose of your gun and smooth that glue around. Or you can take a scrap piece of foam as well. And that's just going to seal that hinge up so the paper doesn't peel off. Now make sure you don't close this too soon so that the glue joins together and it glues the thing shut. You want to leave that open. So next we're going to move on to the ailerons. Now this plane has ailerons in the top and the bottom wing. So what we're going to do is we're going to peel this over on both sides. We want to put our bevel cut on the actual aileron control surface here. So go ahead and do that on both of them on the wing. Now one thing I like to do with my control surfaces is they're kind of a little tight there. What I like to do is just take a barbecue skewer and stick the needle in there and just drag it down a couple of times. What that does is it gives it a nice loose area so that you don't get that rubbing up anymore. So now that we've got the bottom wing assembled, we're going to move on to the middle wing. The middle wing is the wing with the 2 holes cut in it and the little notches here without the control surfaces. Go ahead and repeat the process of beveling the front, gluing down the spar, and folding the wing over and gluing everything up that we did on the bottom wing. Once you've got your middle wing assembled, set that aside and we'll get together the parts for the top wing. Alright, now for the top wing, you've got it laid out, but the additional step we're going to have to do here is we've got these little markouts here on the end. What we're going to want to do is pop the foam out because that's where our servos for the ailerons are going to be. Alright, so now that you got those popped out, let's get our servos together with the Y harnesses attached and get them ready to install in the wing. Alright, so now with these servos, you don't need to worry about centering them and getting the servo arms on them quite yet, because we'll be able to do that after the plane is assembled. So what you want to do is take the servo with the wire facing towards the back of the wing and just test fit it in each of those cutouts, the wire facing back there. Alright? So everything looks good. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little glue around the edge and a little dab in the middle and go ahead and just set our servo in there. Go ahead and do that on both sides. Alright, now once the servos are in place, once again we're going to put our spar down the center of the wing. Alright, now that we got our spar in, we can pick up our wing and fold it over, and we can do our double bevel cut on the front. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do this one a little bit different. But what we're going to do is we're going to glue down the front here on top of our skewer. We're going to fold it over. But make sure we're not pushing down too hard on the back because we want that to be able to stay peeled up a little bit. So hold this down until it dries. So now once that's dry, go ahead and just fold the wing back Go ahead and take your Y harness that you got your servo wires hooked up to and pull that down and through there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold the wing back over, but what we're going to do is we're going to put a bead of glue right down there, and then we're going to close it over, and then we'll put a bead of glue across the back here to seal it up. So once that's dry, go ahead and make sure your ailerons are free. Go ahead and fold them back and put the bevel on the control surface. So the other parts we have here, we're going to assemble once we get the wings on the plane. So go ahead and grab your fuselage and we're going to get these guys attached. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start with our top wing. Now before we install the top wing, what we need to do is we need to take a look at the fuselage here. And there's this little bracket that holds up the top wing. What we need to do is where the hole is cut in the top center core of the fuselage, we need to put a notch in that support. And that's going to be so we can get our servo wire through and down through that hole. So go ahead and just slice that, break that little piece off, so you've got that notch in there like that. Okay? So now take your wing and hold it with the servo wire down like that and just start sliding it in. Now you may have to open up these holes a little bit more as you're doing it. That shouldn't be a problem. Go ahead and do as you need it. Now when you're inserting it, you've got the little opening here. Go ahead and stick your finger in there to line it up with that notch you cut so it'll go through. So once you've got it through and in that opening and enough in there, just use a pliers to go ahead and reach up there and grab it and pull it out. So now as you're sticking the rest of the wing through slowly rock it back and forth. And just make sure to go and tug on the servo wire to make sure it gets pulled all the way through. Now as you're getting the wing in there, go ahead and grab a ruler and slide it in from using the edge of the control surface here and just measure it to make sure you got it centered. So once you got the wing centered and you got it square, the fuselage this way, go ahead and just put a bead of glue around it and just smear that in using a scrap piece of foam. Do that on both the top and the bottom. So once we got the top wing in, now what we want to do is we want to find these guys, and we want to find the ones that are for the top wing, right? Those should be the ones that only have one hole in them. All right. So go ahead and take these and peel off the paper from one of the sides on each of them. Okay. Now that you've got that done, go ahead and take them to the edge of the table and curl them. You don't need to curl them a whole lot, just a little bit. Curl them a little bit more where this junction comes in, because that's going to wrap around the front of the wing. But otherwise, you just want to have a little bitty curl in them, nothing too drastic. And be careful when you're curling this area that you don't accidentally yank it apart and break it. All right, so now what you want to do is you want to take these that you have them curved, and we're going to turn the plane over, right? So what we want to do is we want to take the part with the hole in it and line it up like that. Then we're going to just wrap this over the wing and go down. And that's going to be like there. Okay, so now what we want to do is take some glue and just put a little bit of glue from where it starts to bend around the front of the wing on the bottom of this. And go ahead and glue it on there, holding it down, letting it dry. Be sure to smear away any excess glue around there. Now once that's dried, go ahead and flip the plane over and just put a little bit of glue on this side of it. Go ahead and fold that over. Now I just realized this is a little short. I'll fix that in the plan so that in the final build this will extend all the way to the back of the wing. So go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Alright, now that we got that done, we're going to move to the middle wing. So now we're going to move on to getting the middle wing installed. Now this is going to be a little tricky because we have all these wires that we pulled through this hole here. The problem is they need to come through this hole on the middle wing. So what we're going to do is push all these wires down into here and have them running down the fuselage like that to get them out of the way. We'll pull them through once we're done with getting the middle wing installed. Alright, now that we got our wires out of the way, we're ready to insert the middle wing. So go ahead and take the wing and just slide it in there. So now once again with this, you're going to have to trim the opening as required. Looks like this is a little tight, so I'm going to trim it. What you can use is you can use the guides that we have in the hole, the interior hole and that, and use that as a guide to kind of open the wing holes up here a little bit. Now to align this wing is pretty simple because all you need to do is you've got the holes in the fuselage there, and just make sure that the hole in the wing and the hole in the fuselage line up, and then the wing should be center. You can also check by just setting the plane like this or taking your hands and doing it. So now once you got that wing installed, like we did on the top one, just run a bead of glue on the top and the bottom and seal around. Also, before you're doing this, make sure you got enough glue in your glue gun. Okay, so now once you got your middle wing secure, go ahead and find the pieces for the middle wing. And we're going to repeat just like we did on the top wing, but on this one. Now when you're putting these on, make sure you curve them and stick the top piece in between the wings. Don't glue it in right away, but go ahead and stick it in there just so it's easier to install. Alright, now we got our middle wing installed, so let's move on to the bottom wing. So now with our bottom wing, before we install this, we're going to put these wraparound pieces on before we glue it on, because we don't have to stick the wing through the fuselage and all on this. We're just going to be gluing it to the bottom. So these aren't going to keep us from sticking it through, so we can get them on when it's easier outside right away. So now if you get these installed and they hang a little past the end there, go ahead and just take your razor blade and trim those off. Alright, so now let's get the wing attached. So what we're going to want to do is take the wing and open up this hatch on the bottom. Now you're going to want to set the wing in so that the back of the wing here is level with the back of the opening in the fuselage. And you should be able to use the sides of the hatch here to line it up with the formers that you have on the inside. So I'll go ahead and put that on there and see how it fits. It should notch in pretty good. So pull the wing off and go ahead and put glue on the formers on the inside, and then also kind of on the part you cut for the fuselage here. And then go ahead and stick that back on where you had it aligned up before. Keeping the hatch open and just push down really good and hold it there until it dries. So once you've got that done, what we want to do is, just like on the middle wing, we want to put some glue in here to put a nice bead of glue to help keep this wing on the top side. So now what you do is you just want to test and make sure the hatch closes. So go ahead, just push that in, and you might have to just push the back in. Just get it in there so it seals in pretty good. All right. The next step is we're going to put in the struts that go between the wings here. If you're building the triplane version, you're going to have these 4 pieces here that are labeled top and bottom. If you're building the biplane version, you've got these longer 2 pieces here that you're going to use. They'll install the same way, you just use the different pieces. So let's set the biplane ones aside. So what you do is you got these pieces here. Go ahead and open them all up. Put a 45-degree bevel on the fronts here, like this. Now what we're doing is we're just going to do a C-fold, fold them over, and glue them together. Go ahead and do that to all 4 of these. Alright, once you got these assembled, take your bottom and just rub it a little bit on the bench. You're going to get a little bulb of foam here when you fold it over, and that'll just help flatten it up. Now you've got your bottom 2 and your top 2. Now what we're going to do with these is those notches in the formers that you put on the plane here are where these are going to rest. So go ahead and slide it in, and then just kind of test fit it by tilting it up, and it should kind of snap into place. Go ahead and do that with all of these. Once you got them test fit in there and everything seems to be looking good, go ahead and take them out one at a time. And what you want to do is just you want to put some glue in the bottom one, flip it upside down, put a little glue in the top one, and then go ahead and fit it back in. Now you don't need to use a lot of glue for this. Just use a little bit, just enough to keep them in. Because these aren't structurally doing anything, they're mostly for appearance. Well, they will help a little bit if you got the wings in a little crooked. They will help keep them evenly spaced so that they aren't narrower on the top and bigger on the bottom, or different widths on both ends. Alright, there we go. Now we got our struts installed. So the next step is we're going to get out those pieces that we had set aside when we were skinning the fuselage, and we're going to get those installed next. So the 4 pieces we had installed before, these are side liners, and this is kind of the bottom and back of the cockpit. And then you've got the windshield here. Let's set the windshield and the bottom aside for a moment, and we'll go with the side liners. Now with these guys, on it you've got to bevel the top of these at a 45 degree. Now make sure when you're doing this, you don't bevel the same sides. So what we'll do is we'll bevel the one side on the top of this one and on the other one. Okay, so as you see, we got the opposite sides beveled. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our plane, and how these fit in is the steeper angle like this. Let me use this one. Steeper angle like this sits in here. So what you need to do is lay it flat, and then we're going to kind of tilt it up, and it's going to have to go in kind of like this. Now as you're fitting it, you may find you have to trim it or bevel it a little bit more in order to get it to fit in good. So go ahead and just kind of fit that in there so that the front face of this is flush with kind of this right here. So once you got it where it fits in there good, take and put a bead of glue on the bottom. Now don't worry about the top at the moment. Stick it in there, kind of get it so it tilts up like that. And then take a scrap piece of foam, just put a little dab of glue on it there, and just kind of run it right here to seal it up right in that area. This isn't structurally doing anything, it's just sealing it up to give it a little good appearance. Go ahead and repeat the same process with the other side. Alright, now once you got those in, we're going to grab the bottom of the part here. Now how this is going to fit in is going to fit in right here like this. And we want the top of this angle part here to kind of be level with this back curve here. So what we want to do is we want to take the bottom of this and we want to put a bevel on it. Alright, once you've got your foam beveled, we're going to do a test fit. Now what you want to do is the front of this you want to align with kind of the back edge of the spar on your wing. So go ahead and stick that in the cockpit there, and then push down. But you want to slide it in so it fits about like that. Looks like we got a pretty good fit. So what we're going to do is on the beveled part, we're just going to put some glue down. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little glue on the back here. Go ahead and set this down. Just kind of slide this in, making sure not to push too hard. Now if you want to seal this up good, you can go ahead and just put a little bead of glue all the way around. Then use your scrap foam to smooth it all out. So the next thing we're going to do is install the windshield. Now the windshield isn't perfectly symmetrical, so there's a specific side that you want to bevel, and it's the side marked on the plans. So make sure that when you mark that when you're tracing this out so you can get it to bevel properly. So let's go ahead and take and put a bevel on the side that's supposed to. You're supposed to, and about a 45-degree bevel is good for this. So now once you have that bevel in, go ahead and pull off the side that has the smaller surface to it. So now take this to the edge of your table and curve it. Alright, so let's bring our fuselage in. So you've got the two barbecue skewers here. And basically you're going to line up the point of it to the tip of both of those skewers on each side. And it should kind of curve sitting like that. The back of the foam should be flush with the arc you cut for the cockpit opening. So go ahead and just put a bead of glue from tip along the edge to the other tip of the barbecue skewer. Then stick your windshield back down there, applying some firm pressure. If you get any glue that sticks out, go ahead and smooth that in, and just hold that there until the glue dries. Alright, so now the next step is we're going to put the power pod into the plane. So the first thing we need to do when we do that is you've got the barbecue skewer here that we stuck all the way through the cowling. What we need to do is we need to pull that out. Then we're going to take our ESC and feed it down the center here. Now as we're sticking the power pod in, make sure that the area with the square on the top is facing upward. So now as you're pushing this in, it needs to go in so this, if you're using the CPAC motors, there's the orange line on the top there. That's going to be at about where the front of the plane is. So push it in to be just a little shy of that. Then what you'll do is take your barbecue skewer that you have and stick that through the side of the cowling and the side of the center core part. And then just slowly push this in until you kind of hit the hole in the side of the power pod. Okay, and if you push through and you get a little resistance again, just push it in a little bit more. Then you should get all the way through. Once you've got the power pod inserted, go ahead and pull all your wires if you haven't already for the tail and the wings through the hole, and then also pull both the power wire and the servo wire from the power pod up through that hole that's in the bottom of the middle wing there. Once you've got all your wires and the power plug pulled up through the hole, go ahead and hook everything up to your receiver. Once you've got everything hooked up to your receiver, go ahead and get your radio out and bind it, and then we're going to get everything set up so we can start installing all of the control linkages. So as I had mentioned earlier in the video, because of our tail using 2 servos, we need to do a special setup in the menu of our radio for this. Now if you're using a Spectrum radio, what you want to do is you want to go to Model Setup and Aircraft Type. When you get there, you want to go to the section for tail. Now for the tail, you want to make sure that you find the setting that has dual elevator and single rudder. Make sure you select that, and then you should be good. Now what you want to do is go back to your main radio, and you want to see, when you do the elevator, where did it set it to? It looks like on my receiver it set it to auxiliary 1, so I want to make sure that I plug one of the elevators into the elevator and one into the auxiliary 1. It should get you where you need to go in order to get the control linkages hooked up. Alright, we're going to start with the rudder. So make sure you have your plane powered up either with the receiver or that you're using the servo centering tool so that you've got the servos powered so they're not going to move around as you're putting them in. So go ahead and get a Z-bend on your wire and stick it through the outermost hole on the servo arm. Next, what you're going to want to do is you've got the slit there for where the control horn is going to go. But go ahead and take a barbecue skewer and just kind of use the tip of that to open that up a little bit. Then take and test fit your control horn in there. See how it fits. Now what we're going to do is take our popsicle stick and hold that against everything to make sure that the rudder stays straight. And then take your pliers and kind of mark where you want the next bend to be. There. Then go ahead and make another Z-bend for that. Once you've got the Z-bend made, put on your control horn and test fit it into the hole. Using your popsicle stick to make sure everything's aligned. Once you think you'd have it pretty good, go ahead, pull it out, put a bead of glue in the hole, go ahead and stick the horn in, then be sure to hold it there until the glue dries. Alright, now that we got our rudder hooked up, we're going to move on to the elevators. Now with the elevators, you're going to repeat the same process, except for what we're going to do is we're going to put the wire in the innermost hole on the elevators.
Timer start.
So let's move on to the wings. All right, so for the ailerons, the first step is you're going to want to put your control horns on. So you're going to want to use the single arm control horn and have it pointing straight down. Go ahead and put those on both wings and screw them in. Once you've got the servo horns installed, go ahead and hook everything up using your control horns here in the wings on both sides. So now when you're putting the control wire into the aileron servo control arm, go ahead and put it on the inner hole. Now that we got our ailerons on the top hooked up, now what we need to do is we need to link those to the ailerons on the bottom wing. So start by going to the mark on the upper aileron and opening that up for a servo horn. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put that in with the hole facing towards the front of the wing. Go ahead and test fit that in there. If that looks good, you can go ahead and glue this horn in right away. Now on the bottom aileron, we've got a mark here. So what you want to do is you want to open that mark up. And on this one, what we're going to do is stick the horn in with the hole towards the back of the wing. Now don't glue that one in right away. So go ahead and get a piece of your control wire and go ahead and bend a Z-bend in one end of that. So once you got a Z-bend in, go ahead and feed it from the outside in through the control horn you put on the aileron of the top wing. Run it through the slot of the middle wing, and it should come up and line up with the inside of the servo horn on the bottom wing. So now once you've got that in there, go ahead and take your pliers and mark approximately where you're going to want to bend to get the wire through the hole. Using your fingers to kind of line up the lower aileron with the wing there, or you can use the popsicle stick as well. So once you've got that marked, go ahead and put a Z-bend in. Now that you have the Z-bend in, go ahead and pull the servo horn out, feed it onto the wire, and then go ahead and just test fit the servo horn back in. Alright, once you're good with that, go ahead and pull it out, put a bead of glue in, and glue it in. Now that you got that installed, go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Alright, now that we got all of our control surfaces hooked up, we're ready to move on to the landing gear. So here are the parts you're going to need if you're going to be building the landing gear. Now one thing to note is that you can build this without embedding the wheels in the pontoons if you're going to be hand launching it and just landing it on the ground. However, if you want to actually take off from a runway, I highly recommend the wheels because the plane, because of how short it is, it tends to want to nose over as you give it throttle on the ground if you don't have it. Let's get started. The first parts we're going to start with are these three right here. We have some doublers that are going to act as spacers inside the pontoon, and then this is the strut that's going to go from the pontoon up to the bottom of the wing. So start by taking these two spacers, cracking them open, and peeling out the center foam in the center of them. Go ahead and just put a little bit of glue on the top, in the middle there, a little bit on the front, and then just fold this guy over. Go ahead and do that to the other one as well. Next we're going to turn our attention to this guy. So on the strut here, what we're going to do is break it in half along the angled line there. And we're going to want to put a 45-degree bevel cut on each side. Once we have that done, what we're going to do is just fold it over and glue it together. Once this part's dry, there was those score marks that you noticed that were on the thing. What those are for is those are for us to use some barbecue skewers to help hold this to the wings. So what you want to do is just go ahead and take a skewer and drill it down until it comes out the other side. Do that for both spots. So once you've got that done, go ahead and put a dab of glue in one of the holes and go ahead and stick the barbecue skewer down so that the flat end is flush with the bottom there. Now once you've done that, what you want to do is you want to cut the barbecue skewer off about the thickness of a piece of foam. So about 3/16 inches or so up from the top of the strut. Go ahead and do this to the other hole as well. After you got these assembled, we're going to set them aside for a minute. We're going to bring out our main pontoon piece here. So go ahead and break this open and pull out this ring of foam around the edge here. Once you have that foam removed, we're also going to peel off the paper from the front and back sections on the side here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to curve the front and back pieces here so they can follow the contours of this center piece. So go ahead and just give a little bit of a curve to all of those guys. Okay, now that we've got them curved, we're just going to do a test fit. Now these are a B-fold, so just kind of bring them in, slide them up. Alright, that looks good. Let's get some glue in here and get this glued up. Now for the next step, get your two doublers that you have here. Now these guys are going to fit in, and you have some marked lines that were on the plans. You're going to put them just right there and glue them in place. So we're going to put a little bit of glue on the bottom and a little on one surface. Just go ahead and stick those in, making sure to keep them tight to the outer panel and to the bottom. Now that we've got our doublers installed, what I recommend doing is with a popsicle stick, using that to kind of reinforce the front of this. Because if you're putting the wheels in here, you're going to be cutting out a big section of the bottom here, which is going to really weaken the front of the pontoon. So we're going to put some of these popsicle sticks in just to give it a little extra support up front. To do that, what we're going to want to do is put the popsicle stick into about where the bend is going to start. Go ahead and mark it here. And then go ahead and trim two pieces that length. Now that we've got our two pieces, we're going to glue them in right up at the top there. Alright, now that we got the popsicle sticks in, we're ready to move to the bottom piece. Go ahead and remove the outer edge of foam around here. Alright, so with this piece there was some guidelines on the plans. And you want to actually mark those on both sides. Because what we're going to be doing is if you're going to cut out the wheels, that's where you're going to cut it out after we get it installed. But you're going to want them on this side so you know where not to apply glue when you're attaching it to the bottom part. Okay? So go ahead and remove the paper from the very front portion and the very back portion of this bottom piece. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to curl up these two pieces. So now as we're installing this, as you see, I kind of tore it a little bit there, which isn't a problem. So I'm just going to set that aside for the moment. Now what we want to do is we want to put this in, and you've got this middle section here, and you want to align that with the spacers that you have inside there. Or what you can do is you can align up this back part with where the edge of the paper is right there. Don't worry about gluing that and fitting that in quite yet. So now once you got this in place, what you want to do is we're going to put glue along the side of the foam here and here, along with on the top. But then all we're going to do is just put a little bit of glue on the paper in these areas, because we're going to be cutting these out a little later. And go ahead and use your table as the friend to get that glued down. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fit the front and the back parts in. We're going to start with the front. So go ahead and fit it in the back there, and you may need to pry the sides apart a little bit to get it to fit in. Go ahead and push it up, and if you find that it doesn't quite fit right, it needs a little trimming, go ahead and just give it a good push so that it marks the lines on the inside here, and then go ahead and trim those to where you see them so it'll fit in a little bit better. Once we're comfortable with the fit, we're going to put glue on the sides, but make sure not to put any glue on the back. I'm going to stick the guy in there. I'm going to set it on the table. couple of seconds, rotate, couple of seconds, rotate, couple of seconds, rotate. And then just rock this back and forth a little bit until the glue dries. Now you'll notice that there's excess paper on here. We'll get back to that in a minute. Don't worry about that right now. Now let's move to the back. We're going to repeat the same process here. We're going to stick the back in. We may need to peel the sides apart a little bit. When we get down to the bottom here, just kind of squeeze it, give a little bit of pressure to mark those lines so we can pull it out and trim it where we need to. The last thing you're probably going to need to do on this part is take and shave the end about a ½ inch back, just putting a bevel on it. Once we're happy with that fit, let's glue it on. Now once again, putting glue on the sides, but do not put any on the back. Alright, once all the glue is dry, now what you can do is you can take either your knife or a scissors and go ahead and just trim that excess paper that's on the front and the back. Alright, once you've got all the paper trimmed, now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to cut open the bottom and remove these 2 squares where the wheels are going to go. I'm going to cut there, and then we're going to cut down here. Now hopefully you didn't put glue on the sides here so that these guys pop out nice and easy. Alright, so there's our compartments for our wheels. Now what we want to do is we're going to grab our wheels. We want to grab 1 barbecue skewer. Now here's the trick with this. Depending on the barbecue skewers you get, they may not fit on the wheels pretty good. Or you may have to search for a skinnier one or a fatter one or something like that in the ones you have. So go ahead and find a barbecue skewer where when you put the wheel on, it spins pretty good, but it's not super loose. So now get out these little circle pieces that have the holes in them. So these are going to be spacers. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and put the barbecue skewer completely through the hole on each one of these. So now once you got 2 of them, go ahead and on the hole on the side here, stick the skewer through, stick one of the spacers on, stick one of the wheels, push the barbecue skewer through, and once it pokes out the other side a little bit, go ahead and sneak one of the other spacers on, and run the skewer all the way through. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to push this to pretty much the end there. Now we're going to mark where it is on this side. Rotate it around. I'm going to break it off. Okay? So I'll go ahead and pull this out for a minute and dump these pieces on the ground. What we're going to do is we're going to take and just put a little dab of hot glue on this spacer. I'm going to stick the skewer through, stick it through the hole, and glue that down, making sure that it lines up with the hole. So I'll go ahead and do that on both the front. Alright, once you have your spacers installed, go ahead and take the little shaft that you cut earlier, stick that in, refeeding the hole through, push it all the way through. Okay? So here's what we're going to do to get this all the way in. If you need to, you can take your pliers, but basically pull the shaft back so that it's more than all the way through. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to put a little dab of glue in there. We're going to push it through. I'm going to put a little dab of glue in there, and then push it back a little bit. That should be enough to get our wheel centered. Check and make sure your wheel's spinning freely. Looks like we're good to go. So now that you've got that done and free spinning, go ahead and do the same thing for the back wheel. Alright, now that we got our wheels installed, we got this thing going around pretty good. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to install our strut piece here. So go ahead, pinch the bottom of this. What we're going to do is we're going to just guide that in there making sure this square part on the bottom is aligning with the formers that we have down in the bottom there. And this should go in all the way to the bottom so that the very bottom of the larger part inserts into the notch on the top. Once you've test fit that in, go ahead and pull it out. Put a little bit of glue on the one former, the other on the other former. Go ahead and stick it in. Now once you've got that in, go ahead and just put a little bit of glue around the side here, just to make it nice and secure. Now we got one pontoon done. Go ahead and do the same thing to the other one. Now that we got our pontoons done, we're going to focus on getting them attached to the plane. Now if you look at the pontoons, on the drawings they had little notch marks on the side of the strut here. There's two on one side and one on the other. So what you want to do is those correspond to these holes that we're going to use for supports in the bottom of the wing. So the one that has the two sides, you want that to go towards the center of the plane. Now you've got your little pegs that you put up here with the barbecue skewers. Go ahead and just put a little bit of a bevel on those. And those should line up with the two holes that are inside the gap here on this little decorative piece. So go ahead and line those up and then just kind of push this in, breaking the, like that, popping the holes through the bottom piece of the foam board on the wing. All right. So now that we got that in place, we need to cut a few other strut pieces. So what you've got on the outside here, we've got a hole here. And what we've got is we've got the notch here. And what we want to do is we want to cut a piece of barbecue skewer that's going to run from inside that notch to inside that hole there. So what I do is just take and put the barbecue skewer so that it about lines up with the hole, and then it's about lined up with the strut here. Put your finger kind of marking where it is to get a good length. And if it's a little long, that's not going to be a problem. And just go ahead and cut that piece. And what you can actually do is if you've got that piece figured out, go ahead and cut 3 of those. So we have 1 for the one side and 2 for the other side. So now the last piece we're going to need is we've got one strut that comes from the very back where this meets into the wing, and it's going to go up to the hole that's in the top of the pontoon right there. Right. So go ahead and take another barbecue skewer, figure out where the hole is, and cut it. Now this one can be extra long because it's not going to interfere with the wheels at all. So as long as you know it's long enough, even if it's like 1 inch to 2 long, that should still be fine. So now that we have our back piece and our side pieces, go ahead and just stick these into the holes there just to make sure that there's enough room where we'll be able to slide them in. Then what you're going to do is take this back skewer that you have, go ahead and stick it through the hole and lean it up so just a little bit of it is there on the strut. Now we can glue this one in place right away before we do anything else. We're going to put a bead of glue in there. I'm going to put a bead of glue right there. Stick it in, push it down. Just kind of hold it there to let it dry. Okay, so now once we got that guy glued in, then what we're going to do is we're going to want to take our skewers that we're sticking to the wing and go ahead and test fit those into here, right? Okay. So we've got those in there like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these out and we're going to glue them in right away. So go ahead and put a bead of glue in there. Stick the skewer in. Now as you're putting these in, you want to keep them at about a 45-degree angle. Okay. Go ahead and let that glue dry. So now that you've got your skewers in and everything's dry, we're going to attach the pontoon to the wing. So start with taking the single-sided support skewer and sticking that in the hole that you already got punched for it. Rotating towards the center, line up the holes for the two skewers that go on the main strut, and then just keep rotating so that the other skewers slide into the two holes you have marked for them. Then just kind of push everything down and together. Once you've got the pontoon fitted on the one side, before you glue it in, get the pontoon on the other side to this point. Alright, now that you have both of your pontoons assembled and fit into the wings, making sure that you haven't glued them in at this point, what we're going to want to do is take and level one of the pontoons and get it straightened and aligned. To do this, we're going to get a triangle, one of our trusty Flite Test Foamboard triangles here. Make sure it's level vertically. Now that we know that it's parallel to the wing, what we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler here and measure at the front of the wing and measure at the back of the wing to see if it's angled forward or back. Now that we know that it's straight this way and that it's straight this way, what we want to make sure is we want to make sure it's straight this way. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to take and go to our seam here and set our ruler up and measure how far it is from the center of the plane to the edge of the pontoon at the back here. And then we're going to go up to the front here and do the same thing. So now that we have one of our pontoons leveled, what we're going to do is we're going to take the other one and use what we just did as a guide, right? So go ahead and pull that off. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this pontoon in. We're going to glue it, we're going to put it in. We're going to take our triangle to quick level it this way. We're going to take our ruler to quick level it this way. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler to make sure that it's perfectly parallel by measuring it this way. So glue in the 3 holes here, glue in the 2 holes there, along with glue around the perimeter of the opening, and a little just down the center of the bottom there. So go ahead and get that rotated and tilted in. Push it all the way down. Start with our triangle. Measure the front. Measure the back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to measure at the back of this pocket here and at the front of the pocket here. You can double check that it's still straight. Just hold that until it dries. Now that this guy's dry, what we're going to do is we're going to pull this one off and we're going to repeat the same process. Alright, now that we've got these secured in, go ahead and take your glue gun and just put a little bit of extra glue around where all of these struts go into the wing and also where they go into the pontoon, just to make sure they stay in place nice and good. Alright, now that we got our landing gear on, the plane's almost ready to fly. So there's one additional thing I would recommend doing, though it is optional, and that is strengthening the vertical stabilizer a little bit. So what I'd recommend for doing that is rotate the rudder so that the top is available here, and take a barbecue skewer. Now what you want to do is you want to basically center that barbecue skewer on the top of the foam, pretty much on the center of the horizontal stabilizers there. And slowly just take and just start spinning it around like we were doing when we were inserting the barbecue skewer in the horizontal stabilizers. Just slowly spinning it. Use your fingering to feel where it is and if it's approaching one of the sides of the foam. And run this all the way down until it sticks through the horizontal stabilizers into the actual cone of the tail. This is going to help a lot for if the plane ever flips over and you hit the rudder and stuff like that. And in general, I recommend doing this on a lot of your flight test planes or any other planes that have just a single sheet vertical stabilizer or even horizontal stabilizer, as it just adds a lot of strength to it and helps you out. So once you've made it all the way through, go ahead and just stick a bead of glue, a rather generous one, in the tip of the tail and push this all the way down. Now what you can do is you can just take your knife and just trim it off. And if you'll see, that adds a pretty good stability to it. If you want to add another one up in the front or up here, that's not a bad idea as well. Now that you got the plane assembled, I'm going to show you how to put the battery into it. So start by flipping the plane over. So you've got the battery hatch here. Now as I said, you're going to probably want a 2200 3-cell in order to balance this out. Okay? So make sure all your control wires and everything are tucked kind of back behind the hatch here. Now what you're going to want to do is take your battery and just kind of slide it down in here. It's going to be a tight fit into the hatch like that. Once you've got it laid flat, just go ahead and push it forward. Right? Now you've got the hole in the center of the cowling there, and that serves twofold. One, so you can see how far your battery is forward, and two, so when you're done, you can push it back out, right? So once you've got the battery in, you'll notice that there's two holes on the wings, out there and out there. Those are where the CG needs to be. I know it seems a little far forward, but I have a feeling that it has something to do with how close these wings are together and some funky aerodynamics that are happening. So now before we figure out where the CG is on this, let's put the prop on so we have everything on the plane that we're going to have before it flies. One thing I do recommend is the motors come with those little spacer rings there. I would recommend putting those on just to keep the prop a little bit further away from the front of the plane. It'll help with airflow around it. Okay, now that we've got our prop on and our battery in, let's check our CG. Looks a tad tail heavy to me, but if I tip it any way a slightly different of horizontal, it tends to fall in that direction. So I think I'm just going to move the battery forward just a smidge to make us a little nose heavy, and the plane should be good to go. Now for your reference, the battery is pretty much up to the front of it as it is right now, and that's probably how it's going to be on most planes. Now what I'd recommend is when you're out in the field, making sure you have a screwdriver or something like that that you can use to help you push the battery. Because I have pretty long fingers, so I can kind of get it in and out easy, but not everybody's going to be in that case, and I'd still probably use this anyways. So now that we've got our battery and our plane and everything, let's power it up so we can check some of the settings. Alright, so we've got our plane powered up. Now before I did this, I made sure I set a throttle kill setting on my remote. Because when you're inside and you're messing with the plane, you don't want the engine accidentally coming on.
Timer start. Timer stop.
So make sure you do that before you mess with this. Alright, so now as for the settings, the first thing we're going to talk about is the tail. Specifically the elevators. Now because you're using two servos, the servos may be off a little bit, and you may notice that they don't travel the same distance up and down. So now if that happens to be the case, what you need to do is go into your servo travel settings and adjust how far up or down either of them travel in order to get them in sync. Okay, now when setting up dual rates on this, if you only have high and low rates, that's fine, but I'm going to give you instructions for both high, mid, and low rates. So for high rates, I usually just leave everything as they are. I don't give everything full travel. Okay. For the mid rates, I recommend putting 70% on the aileron and elevator, but leaving the 100% on the rudder. Now for low rates, I could go to 50% on the elevator and aileron. Now it doesn't look like they're moving a whole lot, but it's a small plane and they're decent sized surfaces for the plane as it is. And then for the rudder, you can dial this down to 80%. Alright, we've got the plane built, the radio set up and programmed, ready to get some paint on this thing and get it up for a maiden. Alright, now we've got our plane painted and we're ready to get it out for a test flight. Now a few things to note about the plane. One other thing you can do is if you got some barbecue skewers or some small dowels, you can go ahead and put those in here to replicate the machine guns that were on it. And also, I had mentioned the biplane version. Here's the biplane version of the plane. So now with this, I didn't put all of the decoration on the fuselage here and left the other wing off. Now this one's going to fly a little bit different than the triplane version, but if you want something that handles a little bit easier, this one will work good for you. The key is on both of these is make sure that you're using an 11-inch prop. If you use a 10-inch prop, these planes are not going to fly very well. You need to use that minimum 11-inch prop. As soon as the weather clears up here, we'll get these guys up flying with the Sea Duck. So look forward to that video in the future. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you build one of these triplanes and you get as much enjoyment out of flying it as I do. Take care.